March 23, 1945, dawned cold and gray over the Rhine River, but Major General Frank Milburn stood on German soil with fire in his eyes. The 21st Corps of the United States Third Army had just crossed the mighty waterway, and what awaited them would become one of the most lopsided military victories in modern warfare. Behind him, thousands of American soldiers pushed deeper into the Rhineland-Palatinate, unaware they were about to participate in a battle so decisive that German resistance would collapse like a house of cards. The German Army Group G, commanded by General der Panzertruppen Hermann Bauch, had dug into positions around the Saar-Palatinate Triangle, a region bounded by the Rhine, Moselle, and Saar rivers. Berlin had ordered these forces to hold at all costs. What the German High Command didn't know was that their defensive positions had already been compromised. American intelligence officers had spent weeks studying aerial photographs, interrogating prisoners, and intercepting radio communications. They knew every bunker, every artillery position, every supply route. Colonel James Polk of the 63rd Infantry Division gathered his battalion commanders in a hastily erected command post near Worms. Maps covered every surface, marked with red arrows that showed German positions and blue lines indicating American advance routes. "Gentlemen," Polk said, his voice cutting through the cigarette smoke that filled the tent, "we're going to execute Operation Undertone. General Patton wants this region cleared in 2 weeks. I intend to do it in 10 days. The officers exchanged glances. They had fought across France, survived the bitter cold of the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge, and pushed into Germany itself. But something felt different about this operation. The intelligence was too good. The German positions, once thought impregnable, now seemed vulnerable. One captain finally spoke up. "Sir, the Germans have 6 divisions in this sector." "That's nearly 80,000 men," Polk smiled grimly. "Had 6 divisions, Captain. Our bombers have been pounding their supply lines for 3 weeks. Their ammunition is running low. Their fuel is almost gone. And most importantly, their will to fight is breaking. According to historical records maintained by the National Archives and the United States Army Center of Military History, the German forces in this sector had been reduced to approximately 60% combat effectiveness due to sustained Allied air attacks and artillery bombardment. The real genius of Operation Undertone lay not in brute force but in deception and speed. While the 21st Corps prepared to strike from the north, the 15th Corps would simultaneously attack from the south. The German forces would be caught in a massive pincer movement with the rivers at their back and no clear escape route. General Patton had studied the German predicament and declared it the perfect killing ground. As darkness fell on March 23rd, American artillery began the preliminary bombardment. Thousands of shells screamed across the night sky, transforming German defensive positions into eruptions of fire and dirt. March 24, 1945 brought no respite for the German defenders as American forces surged forward at dawn. The 70th Infantry Division, nicknamed the Trailblazers, led the assault from the north while the 12th Armored Division prepared to exploit any breakthrough. What German commanders had expected to be a slow, grinding advance turned into a blitzkrieg in reverse. The very tactics that had brought Germany such success in 1940 and 1941 were now being used against them with devastating effect. Sergeant Harold Morrison of Company B, 63rd Infantry Division, would never forget the sight that greeted him that morning. "We expected heavy resistance," he later recalled in interviews preserved by the Veterans History Project. "Instead, we found chaos. German soldiers were wandering around in a daze. Some were trying to surrender. Others were just sitting by the roadside, too exhausted or shell-shocked to even raise their hands. By evening of March 24th, the American advance had penetrated 20 miles into German territory. The pincer movement was working exactly as planned. German forces in the Sarpalatinate Triangle found themselves increasingly isolated, with American units cutting their supply routes and escape paths. Radio intercepts revealed growing panic among German commanders, with urgent messages being sent to Army Group G headquarters requesting permission to withdraw. General Balck faced an impossible situation. Hitler had explicitly forbidden any retreat from the Rhine defenses. To withdraw without permission meant court-martial and execution. To stay meant watching his entire army group be destroyed. Balck chose loyalty to his soldiers over loyalty to the Führer. On the night of March 24th, he issued coded orders for a fighting withdrawal toward the Rhine bridges. March 25, 1945 marked the moment when Operation Undertone transformed from a breakthrough battle into a full-scale rout. American commanders realized the German forces were attempting to escape, and they responded with a relentless pursuit that gave the enemy no time to regroup or establish new defensive lines. The order came down from General Patton himself. Keep moving. Don't give them a moment's rest. We're going to bag the whole lot of them. The 42nd Infantry Division, called the Rainbow Division for its distinctive patch, led the chase eastward. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Quinn pushed his battalion through 2 days without rest, capturing town after town as German forces fled before them. It was like nothing I'd ever seen, Quinn recorded in his official after-action report. We'd enter a village and find German equipment abandoned everywhere, trucks, artillery pieces, even tanks with their engines still running. The crews had just fled into the woods. The roads became clogged with retreating German soldiers, civilian refugees, and abandoned military equipment. American fighter bombers circled overhead like hawks, diving periodically to strafe columns of vehicles trying to reach the river crossings. The 9th Air Force flew more than 3,000 sorties during this period, turning daylight movement into a death sentence for German forces. Pilots reported that some German units had begun moving only at night, using horse-drawn carts instead of trucks to avoid detection. Captain William Hendricks of the 10th Armored Division intercepted a large German column near Landau on March 26. His tank company, consisting of 17 Sherman tanks, encountered nearly 5,000 German soldiers trying to reach the Rhine. They saw us coming and just stopped. Hendricks later testified to Army historians. Their officers came forward waving white flags. They wanted to surrender en masse. We didn't have enough men to properly guard them all, so we just pointed them west and told them to start walking. We gave them 1 guard for every 200 prisoners. Yet isolated pockets of resistance still existed. A group of Waffen-SS troops from the 6th SS Mountain Division fortified themselves in Neustadt and refused all surrender demands. It took American artillery and airstrikes to finally dislodge them on March 27th. When American troops entered the town, they found 32 dead Germans and captured only 11 survivors. These fanatics represented a tiny minority, but they demonstrated that not all German soldiers had given up. The speed of the American advance began creating its own problems. Supply lines stretched thin as combat units outpaced their logistics. Ammunition trucks struggled to keep up with tanks that were covering 50 miles per day. March 28, 1945 witnessed the American pincers finally closing around the remaining German forces in the Sarpalatinate Triangle. Elements of the 21st Corps advancing from the north met units from the 5th 10th Corps pushing from the south near the town of Kirchheim-Belenden, effectively cutting off more than 40,000 German soldiers from any hope of escape. The trap that American planners had envisioned weeks earlier had become reality, and now the grim work of dismantling organized German resistance began in earnest. Brigadier General Howard Turner commanded the task force assigned to reduce the pocket. His orders were clear but challenging: destroy. German combat capability while minimizing American casualties and preventing unnecessary destruction of German towns. Turner set up his command post in a captured German barracks and studied the maps showing concentrations of enemy forces. "They're beaten," he told his staff officers. "Now we need to convince them of that fact before more men die needlessly." American psychological warfare units moved to the front lines, broadcasting surrender appeals in German through loudspeakers mounted on trucks. Leaflets dropped from aircraft explained that further resistance was futile and that prisoners would be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Some German units responded immediately, with entire companies marching out of their positions with white flags. Others remained silent, their commanders unsure whether surrender constituted treason against the Reich. The town of Kaiserslautern became the focal point of the final resistance. Nearly 15,000 German troops had concentrated there under the command of General Lieutenant Kurt von Tippelskirch, a veteran officer who had fought in Russia. Von Tippelskirch faced an agonizing decision. He knew the war was lost. He knew his forces had no chance of breaking through American lines. But he also knew that SS security services were executing officers who surrendered without orders. His family lived in Berlin, effectively hostages to his loyalty. On March 29th, American forces surrounded Kaiserslautern completely. Artillery batteries registered on every major building. Tank destroyers positioned themselves to cover all approaches. General Turner sent a German-speaking officer under a white flag to deliver an ultimatum: surrender by dawn on March 30th or face a devastating assault. Von Tippelskirch requested time to consult with his officers and was granted 4 hours. Inside the German headquarters, a heated debate erupted. Younger officers, many of them Nazi Party members, demanded continued resistance. Older veterans argued for surrender to save their men's lives. Von Tippelskirch listened to both sides, then made his decision. "Gentlemen," he announced, "we have fought honorably, we have obeyed our orders. But I will not sacrifice 15,000 men for a cause that is already lost. We will surrender at dawn." Not everyone agreed. That night, approximately 300 SS troops attempted to break out of the encirclement. They ran directly into positions held by the 44th Infantry Division. The firefight lasted less than an hour. When it ended, 200 Germans lay dead, and the survivors surrendered. American losses: 3 wounded. At exactly 0600 hours on March 30th, white flags appeared on buildings throughout Kaiserslautern. Von Tippelskirch, wearing his full-dress uniform and carrying his ceremonial sword, walked forward to meet General Turner. March 30th, 1945 brought scenes that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. Thousands upon thousands of German soldiers laying down their weapons and marching into captivity while American troops watched in amazement at the sheer scale of the collapse. General Lieutenant Kurt von Tippelskirch stood before General Howard Turner in the main square of Kaiserslautern, the ancient city that had witnessed centuries of European warfare now bearing witness to Germany's humiliation. "I surrender all forces under my command," von Tippelskirch said in heavily accented English, offering his sword to Turner. The American general took the weapon but immediately returned it. "Keep it, General. You and your men fought well. This isn't about honor, it's about ending the killing." Turner's gesture reflected a recognition that the German soldiers, whatever their cause, had been professional adversaries. Behind von Tippelskirch, 15,000 Wehrmacht troops began the process of surrendering their weapons. The administrative challenge was staggering. Captain Robert Martinez of the Corps' Prisoner of War Processing Unit had prepared for perhaps 500 prisoners that day. Instead, he received nearly 20,000. "We ran out of forms within an hour," Martinez later recalled in his memoirs published in 1978. "We ran out of guards. We ran out of space. Eventually, we just started having the Germans organize themselves into companies and march to designated assembly areas. Their officers maintained discipline better than we could have." Throughout the Sarpalatinate Triangle, similar scenes repeated themselves. At Bad Dürkheim, 4,000 Germans surrendered to a single American battalion. At Worms, German soldiers waited patiently in long lines to hand over their rifles to equally overwhelmed American MPs. At Mainz, the garrison commander surrendered the entire city without firing a shot, explaining that he refused to see the historic cathedral destroyed in pointless combat. The sole American prisoner taken during the entire operation, Private James Patterson of the 94th Infantry Division, had been captured on March 26 during a reconnaissance patrol near Zweibrücken. Patterson's squad had stumbled into a German strongpoint in darkness, and in the confusion of a brief firefight, he had been separated from his unit. A German sergeant had found him hiding in a barn, disarmed him, and taken him prisoner. Patterson spent exactly 36 hours in German custody before his captors surrendered to advancing American forces, making him simultaneously a prisoner of war and a liberator of his own guards. "It was surreal," Patterson told Army reporters after his release. "The Germans were more scared than I was. They knew what was happening. They kept asking me if the Americans would shoot them for fighting. I told them no, we'd feed them and send them to a POW camp. They seemed relieved. One guy gave me his last cigarette." Patterson's experience, though unique in its brevity, illustrated the complete breakdown of German morale in the final weeks of the war. By April 1, 1945, Operation Undertone had effectively ended. American forces had cleared the entire region west of the Rhine, destroyed German Army Group G as a fighting force, and captured staggering numbers of prisoners. April 2, 1945, found American intelligence officers struggling to compile accurate statistics from one of the most one-sided victories in military history. Major Daniel Hartmann of the 3rd Army's J2 section sat surrounded by reports, prisoner manifests, and captured German documents, trying to make sense of numbers that seemed almost impossible. The scale of the German defeat in the Saar-Palatinate exceeded even the most optimistic American predictions. The official tally, later confirmed by both American and German military historians, told a devastating story. Approximately 13,000 German soldiers had been killed in action during the 2-week operation. Another 90,000 had been captured, so many that the prisoner of war processing system had nearly collapsed under the strain. Entire German divisions had simply ceased to exist as cohesive fighting units. The 352nd Volksgrenadier Division, the 19th Volksgrenadier Division, and remnants of the 6th SS Division had been completely destroyed. American losses stood in stark contrast. Approximately 800 killed in action, 3,000 wounded, and one man taken prisoner, Private Patterson, who had spent less than 2 days in captivity. The kill ratio exceeded 16-1, and the capture ratio was almost incomprehensible. Major Hartmann calculated that American forces had captured more than 100 German soldiers for every American casualty suffered. "These numbers aren't just statistics," wrote war correspondent Ernie Pyle in one of his final dispatches before his death in the Pacific Theater. "Each one represents a human story, an American family that doesn't have to receive a telegram, a German family that will see their son again, a village that wasn't destroyed, a life that continued instead of ending in some muddy field." Pyle's perspective, published in Stars and Stripes newspaper in early April, reminded readers that military victories, however lopsided, still involved human suffering on all sides. The captured equipment exceeded anything American quartermasters had prepared for. Intelligence teams cataloged hundreds of artillery pieces, thousands of trucks and cars, mountains of small arms, and enough ammunition to supply several divisions. Much of it was obsolete or in poor condition, reflecting Germany's desperate material situation in the war's final months. But some items proved valuable. American forces recovered intact V-2 rocket components, experimental weapons, and detailed maps showing German defensive positions throughout Western Germany. General George Patton visited the battlefield on April 3rd. Touring the surrendered German positions and speaking with both American soldiers and German prisoners. At a press conference held in a captured German headquarters, Patton characterized the operation as a textbook example of maneuver warfare. When a reporter asked about the lopsided casualty figures, Patton responded bluntly, "The Germans fought a stupid battle. They let themselves be trapped with rivers at their backs and no reserves. We executed our plan flawlessly. That's the difference between winning and losing." Not everyone viewed the victory with Patton's satisfaction. Chaplain Thomas O'Brien of the 42nd Infantry Division walked through a prisoner of war camp holding 15,000 Germans and felt profound sadness. "These weren't monsters," he wrote in his diary. They were young men, old men, scared men. Many were just boys, 16 or 17 years old. They'd been lied to, used up, and discarded by their leaders. Now they sat in the mud wondering what would become of them. April 10th, 1945 marked the official conclusion of Operation Undertone's aftermath as the last German prisoners from the Sarpalatne Triangle were processed and transported to permanent camps. American military analysts had already begun studying the operation, recognizing that it represented something extraordinary in the annals of warfare, a complete and decisive victory achieved through superior planning, overwhelming material advantage, and the total collapse of enemy morale. The strategic implications extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. German Army Group G's destruction opened a gaping hole in German defenses along the Rhine. American forces poured through, advancing into southern Germany virtually unopposed. The Wehrmacht, already reeling from Soviet advances in the east and Allied bombing from the air, could no longer mount effective resistance in the west. Military historians would later identify Operation Undertone as one of the crucial final blows that made Germany's defeat inevitable within weeks, rather than months. Colonel William Bradford of the Army War College began analyzing the operation while it was still concluding, interviewing commanders and studying tactical reports. His preliminary assessment, circulated among senior officers in late April, identified several factors contributing to American success. First, overwhelming air superiority had paralyzed German movement and supply. Second, excellent intelligence had allowed American forces to exploit German weaknesses systematically. Third, the pincer maneuver had trapped German forces with no escape route. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, German morale had collapsed completely after years of losses and mounting evidence that the war was lost. But Bradford also noted sobering lessons about the final factor. "We did not defeat a first-rate opponent operating at full capability," he wrote. "We defeated an exhausted, demoralized, poorly supplied army whose soldiers knew their cause was lost." This operation's success should not lead us to overconfidence in future conflicts where opponents may be better motivated and equipped. His warning proved prescient. American forces would face very different challenges in Korea just 5 years later. The fate of Private James Patterson, the sole American taken prisoner during the operation, became something of a legend within the Third Army. Patterson was promoted to corporal, received a Purple Heart despite not being wounded, and became a favorite of war correspondents who saw his brief captivity as symbolizing the operation's lopsided nature. Patterson himself remained uncomfortable with the attention. "I got lost and captured," he told one reporter. "That's not heroic, that's embarrassing." The real heroes are the guys who didn't come home. The 90,000 German prisoners faced an uncertain future. Most were eventually transported to camps in France, Britain, or the United States, where they spent the remainder of the war and sometimes years afterward performing agricultural labor or reconstruction work. American authorities screened prisoners carefully to identify war criminals, Nazi Party officials, and SS members. The vast majority ordinary soldiers conscripted into a war they didn't choose were eventually repatriated to Germany between 1946 and 1948. General George Patton did not live to see the full historical analysis of Operation Undertone. He died in December 1945 from injuries sustained in a car accident in occupied Germany. But his role in planning and executing the operation secured his reputation as one of America's greatest combat commanders. The Third Army's achievements in those 2 weeks of March 1945 demonstrated what American forces could accomplish when properly led, supplied, and deployed. Today, the Sarpalatnate region shows few scars from those desperate weeks in early 1945. The towns have been rebuilt, the battlefields have become farmland again, and the generation that fought there has mostly passed away. But in American military academies, Operation Undertone remains studied as an example of successful operational art, the careful coordination of intelligence, maneuver, firepower, and logistics that achieved decisive results. The numbers tell the story starkly: 13,000 enemies killed, 90,000 captured, 1 American taken prisoner. In the grim calculus of warfare, it represented as complete a victory as military history records. Yet the operation's very lopsidedness raises profound questions about the nature of victory, the human cost of even successful wars, and the fine line between tactical brilliance and exploiting an opponent's total collapse. The American soldiers who participated had won decisively, but they returned home to a world that would soon face new conflicts and new challenges, where victory would not come so easily or at such favorable odds.